Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. Miguna Miguna.
Thank you very much, the organizers of the event, the talk, and of course for the audience. I feel like I've been here before, because in 1990 I actually got admitted to this college, but I couldn't make it because I didn't get enough financial support to be here. So it's good that I'm here, talking from where I'm talking. At least I succeeded to come and talk. So the topic, if I recall, was about the crisis of the political crisis in Kenya. Correct?
Yes, that's correct.
So I'm going to talk about it in a roundabout manner, and I hope that I will be able to satisfy the requirements by the organizers to stick to the topic. The problem, the crisis in Kenya is a crisis of leadership. And I will define what that crisis is. It is a crisis of leadership that has lasted for the last 55 years. We have in Kenya today a leadership completely alienated from the people. A leadership that is not responsive and accountable to the people, the citizens, that they're supposed to deliver services to, that they're supposed to represent. We have a leadership that is largely unelected, was not elected, that I consider illegitimate on the basis that they do not occupy the public positions that they occupy through popular will. There was no democratic election in Kenya in 2017, and I will explain why I do not consider what they had last year as credible, transparent, verifiable elections. On August 2018, it was the 8th of August 2017, and as you have seen through the Cambridge Analytica scandal, we had what can only be described as a fraudulent exercise. Kenyans, about 19.7 million of them, turned up in large numbers to elect, quote unquote, their leaders. They lined up for hours, they cast their ballots through a system called the KIMS kits. It's an electronic system that identifies every voter. You put your thumbprint, or if you don't have a print, your details are entered in a KIMS kit that identifies you as a valid voter. You are then issued with the ballots for the president, for the gubernatorial candidates, for the senatorial candidates, for the women representatives, for members of parliament, for county assembly representatives. You then mark whoever you are supposed to vote for in a booth, then you put it in the appropriate ballot box. It's supposed to be counted after the polls close, the tallies added. The tallies then for the presidential candidate transferred to a form 37A. Then once this is transferred in 37A, the form 37A, which now contains the tallies within that polling station, is put through a KIMS kit, an electronic system like a photocopier or a scanning machine. It can only scan once. You cannot scan one form twice. Once it goes through at the polling station, it is transmitted to the constituency tallying center. at the constituency tallying center, Form 34As are supposed to be now translated into 37Bs, meaning that they collate, they tally all 34As at the constituency tallying center, and the results of that constituency are contained in 37B form. At the constituency tallying center, the 37B form is supposed to be transmitted using the KIMS kits, and you cannot transmit it twice, to the National Tallying Center. There is also transmitted from the polling station and the constituency tallying center to the National Tallying Center simultaneously, will then be transferred into 37C for the president. Now, according to the precedent set by the Court of Appeal in the Miguna case, the results of the polling station are final. You cannot change them. You cannot amend them. You cannot correct them, because that is what is supposed to express the will of the Kenyan people. Then once transferred to the National Tallying Center and transformed to 37C, that is now the official results for the presidential election. Now we are made to understand this did not happen. But the machines did not break down. Everybody voted. There was no fight. There was no struggle at the polling stations. There was no bad weather. There was no earthquake. There was no civil war. But in the end, what we had following the petition against the declaration of Uhuru Kenyatta as president was a photocopy document. The 37C that Chebukati, the chairman of the IBC, read as declaring Uhuru Kenyatta president was not an original document. And he was supposed to sign it, having tallied everything. And he stated in his evidence before the Supreme Court that he had not seen the Form 37 A's and B's and had not tallied them to be able to make 37C. So where did he get his figures? So of course, I wanted to be able to describe that so you understand why I say the election was fraudulent, completely fraudulent. Then, during the petition that followed the declaration of Uhuru Kenyatta as president, the IBC and the chairperson, Chebukati, were ordered to open the KIMS kits and the server so that it could verify who actually won the election. And to date, they have not complied with the court order. To date. So of course, the court ordered, pursuant to the Constitution, that elections, fresh elections, be held in 60 days. But it was not to be just any other election. They said this election must be held in strict conformity to the Constitution, the statutes, and the applicable laws. Which means that they were supposed to meet the same standards that the August 8th election ought to have met and did not meet. What happened? They went on with a coronation exercise that fell below the first one. And I'll tell you just two examples that will demonstrate that it fell below the first one. Number one, returning officers are the people that run elections at the constituency level. I described the polling station, the constituency level, and the National Tallying Center. So the returning officer is the head of the constituency tallying center and the constituency that elects a member of parliament. And of course, voting for the president also happens at the constituency. For the October 26th so-called election, it was not an election, the returning officers were not gazetted. There was no big ad where people applied and then screening was done. They were interviewed, they were vetted, then they were appointed. Then the appointment was published so that the public saw who it is that has been appointed. That did not happen. So there was a citizen's challenge to the the appointment of the returning officers. It went to court before the High Court. And the court found that the returning officers had not been appointed legally. But the court was not asked to declare that they couldn't run the elections of October 26th. So the court did not address that issue. So they went ahead and ran that election. Now, this matter was alive before the Supreme Court in the subsequent petition, and they simply did not address it. But what happened with that court order? That court order, immediately it was issued. It was issued on a Friday like this. It was issued at about 4 or 5 o'clock. The courts closed at 5 o'clock. By 9:30 p.m. that night, it had been appealed. Appeal had been, and it had been, an application had mysteriously been made by someone to stay that order. The order from the High Court had been transcribed. Transcribing orders and translating them into actual documents take a bit of time. And it happens when the courthouses are open. This one was done when the courthouse had been closed. So it was transcribed. The records had been requisitioned mysteriously at night. The records had been transferred to the Court of Appeal. A panel of the Court of Appeal had been mysteriously constituted at night. And because the Court of Appeal panel is 3 judges, 2 of the judges were not based in Nairobi. They had mysteriously found themselves at night in Nairobi, and they had stayed the High Court order so that the elections that were to happen 2 days later would happen. This is how you got to the so-called coronation exercise of October 26th. And then fast forward to last month, the presiding judge of the Court of Appeal, Justice Kariuki, what happened to him? The one who mysteriously made these things happen. He was just appointed the Attorney General by Uhuru Kenyatta. So now you can see direct reward. That's example number 1, that exhibit number 1. Because had this thing been processed properly, the elections 2 days subsequent would not have happened. It would have been extended just like it happened in Liberia. In Liberia, the Supreme Court extended the time because democracy demands no less. The second example, actually there are 3 examples. The second example, to show how egregious this fraud was that in the Constitution of Kenya 2010, it's very clear that in a presidential election, the election must be held in every constituency. So, what is held in every constituency? It means the Electoral Commission must have infrastructure in place, must do all that is necessary to have a transparent, credible election held there. 27 constituencies did not have elections on October 26th because the Electoral Commission could not just conduct elections in those constituencies, no matter the circumstances. In other words, the October 26th election was not in compliance, in strict compliance with the Constitution, and therefore the result cannot be considered legitimate. Because what happens to these people that did not vote, that had no right to decide who their president was going to be? They have just been disenfranchised without any recourse to law. And there was no reason from the Supreme Court why that election was validated, except that before that election, that exercise took place, the deputy chief justice, bodyguard and driver was shot almost fatally, and she felt threatened. She could not even attend court, and there was no quorum for an application that also intended to stop those elections. 2 other judges, I hear, claimed that their bodyguards had been withdrawn and they could not attend court. In other words, the Supreme Court conducted, had that petition in an environment of intimidation and threat, and had no other option but to say Uhuru Kenyatta is the president, because he had the guns and the court had no guns, had no bodyguards. So what I'm trying to illustrate here is that Uhuru Kenyatta, as of today, in my mind, has no legitimacy, no legal legitimacy, have no constitutional legitimacy, has no moral legitimacy, has no political legitimacy. Finally, following the declaration of Uhuru Kenyatta as president, the country was in a state of uprising or appraisal. People were protesting, people were demonstrating as enshrined in the Constitution. They were exercising their right to demonstrate their dissent, to demonstrate their opposition. What was Uhuru Kenyatta's reaction? He called his troops onto the streets to shoot them like insects. 400 innocent people died on the streets of Nairobi and all over the country. They invaded people's homesteads and killed little babies, small babies. A small baby called Baby Pendo was struck dead as the mother cuddled her. Another baby called Baby Mora was struck dead, was shot dead in Nairobi as she lay inside a home. A little boy called Mutinda was shot as he was playing in the balcony of their home. These were not voters. These were not protesters. These were babies. A month before that, the director of the Electoral Commission, the electronic side of the Electoral Commission, called Chris Musando, who had secured who had put a tamper-proof system to ensure that fiddlers and fraudsters did not interfere with the people's sovereignty and did not interfere with the democratic process, was kidnapped like I was kidnapped a month ago, abducted from his vehicle, detained, incommunicado, tortured, and then murdered. His body thrown in a thicket within the county where Uhuru Kenyatta comes from. This was to subvert the democratic process and the constitutional remit. This is why I call Uhuru Kenyatta an illegitimate president, and I call the current regime in Nairobi a despotic regime, because it is not a regime that was installed through a fair, credible, transparent, verifiable election. The coronation exercise that happened on October 26th was just that, a coronation exercise. Now I want to go on to illustrate why this is a crisis of leadership. So here you have a group of elites that are super rich, not because they have worked for any cent that they own. Uhuru Kenyatta has never worked one day of his life. He has never put 1 minute of quality work in his life before he became president. There is no job he ever held. Never held a job. He didn't have a profession. He didn't have a trade. He didn't have a business. He had no skills. He was simply propped up by the former dictator Daniel Arap Moi because he was Kenyatta's son. So you don't expect him to account to anyone, to feel like he has to demonstrate that people need service. And clearly, through more than 6 years of misrule, you can see that he feels entitled. He kills citizens who are expressing dissent. He suppresses the media when they criticize him or when he perceives that they have criticized him. And you saw how he switched off the TV signals for 2 weeks in violation of court orders. He just woke up one day and he said Miguna is going to swear Raila in at Uhuru Park on the 30th of January. I don't want people to see how many people are there. I switch off the TV. He did that. The TV stations went to court. They got orders. He just ignored it. He's ignored it up to today. When they abducted me on the 2nd of February, they just broke into my home. I just had explosions. And before long, they were running all over my house, breaking doors. And within 1.5 hours, they had taken me from my home. They did not identify themselves as the police. They did not identify themselves as having a search warrant or a warrant of arrest. They did not come in police vehicles. They were not wearing uniform. They actually did not speak. I just had noises. There was absolutely no speech, no command. They did not call my name. When they took me, they didn't tell me where they were taking me or for what reason they were taking me. And up to today, they have not advanced any charge that they, after 5 days, they took me to court outside Nairobi in violation of 7 court orders. There was a court order on the day they arrested me, granting me bail. They refused to obey it. The same day, there was another court order saying that they should produce me in court at 2 p.m. They disobeyed it. The following Monday, there was a habeas corpus application for them to produce my body in court. They disobeyed it. There was a subsequent application that they should show cause why they should not be cited for contempt for failing to abide by the court orders. They disobeyed it. There was another court order saying you have to attend court in person and explain why you have not produced it. They disobeyed it. There was another court order that said you have to prepare an affidavit explaining why you have refused to produce Miguna Miguna. They disobeyed it. There was another court order saying now you are in contempt, the court wants to punish you. Come for the punishment. They didn't show up in court. They were attending a national security meeting. I was a threat to national security, therefore. They're attending a meeting instead of going to court. Then on the 5th day, they took me to Kajiado, a magistrate's court, instead of the High Court in Milimani, Nairobi. And they purported to charge me there. The magistrate refused to take a plea. I refused to take a plea. The magistrate agreed with me. The magistrate ordered them to take me within 20 minutes to Nairobi. They could have had a helicopter there to take me to Nairobi. Instead, they drove around meandering the national park, probably thinking that I could be intimidated, that they were going to kill me at the national park. I was not moved. I didn't care. I'd resolved that thing a long time ago, that we are all going to die. So you decide how you're going to die. You either die like a pig, or you die like a honorable human being on your feet. I chose to die like a human being on my feet. So I kept quiet and waited to see what they were doing. Eventually at 6 p.m., they drove to the runway of Jomo Kenyatta International Airport. No security check, no immigration check, no customs check. They simply waited for the flight and then put me on the flight and said, bye-bye, go to Canada. There was no deportation process. It was not a deportation. And you can't deport a citizen by birth. You can't. The law is very clear. My citizenship is given to me by birth. The Constitution simply recognizes it. It does not grant me citizenship. Law does not give you citizenship when you get it by birth. The ones who get citizenship through naturalization are granted that citizenship through the Constitution and the legal instruments, but not me. So they purported to withdraw my passport, and then now they have destroyed it. When the court ordered them to produce it in court, they went and punched holes in it. So there is a myriad, numerous violations of the Constitution. Now, a government that does that, a government that just does not just come to power through illegitimate means, as I've demonstrated, but continues to disobey court orders, is a rogue government, is a dictatorship, Worse is a despotic government. That is what these people are. Because how then do you bring law and order in a country? How do you arrest anyone and compel them to obey legal orders? You do that through the judiciary. That's how a civilized society governs. How do you enforce contracts or corporate agreements, shareholder agreements? How do you enforce a state law, succession? How do you do it? How do you acquire property or dispose of them when some people are above the law and can just take this property and say it is mine because I don't care about the law? You can go to court and say the court has granted you right or access to this thing, but I don't care. This is mine because I have the gun. That is what a despotic state is. In addition, this government presides over rapacious looting of the economy and resources of the country. According to the Auditor General's report, in the last year only, at the presidency alone, more than 2.5 billion Kenya shillings has not been accounted for. The Auditor General has said, they don't respond. The government does not respond. The president does not respond. In any other society, a government would have fallen on that claim alone. This government has gone around the world floating something called Eurobonds, borrowing like there is no tomorrow. And there is nothing to show for it. Most of it just disappeared, vanished in thin air. This is the same government that has lost tens of billions of shillings in every ministry. The Ministry of Devolution, that was headed by Anne Waiguru, who is now the governor, promoted to be governor after looting more than 50 billion Kenya shillings, which they devalued to 700 million. They said 790 or 720 million. But in fact, it was in billions. Has not been charged. Will never be charged for as long as they are in power. In fact, has been rewarded. This is a country where the architect of the biggest scandal ever in the history of Kenya, called Golden Bag Scandal, Kamlesh Patni, is living like a king, a monarch. Travels in yachts and private jets and 7-star hotels. Is king. So, and yet, in the same country, about 65% of the youth with degrees and diplomas, very highly skilled youth, are unemployed. They have nothing to do. That is why, on arrival on Monday, the 26th of March, as I intend to do, God willing, there will be thousands of those youth welcoming me. Not just because they are supporting me, they also have nothing to do. That is the truth. Because the state has decided that they are not going to create jobs for this youth. This is a country where about 65% of the population live in slums. You go to Nairobi, and everywhere you look is slum. Everywhere you look is garbage piles, stinking, disease-carrying garbage. This is the country where the leading teaching referral hospital, Kenyatta National Hospital, had doctors do brain surgery on the wrong patient. How do you do that? How do you get to that? How somebody goes there, a modest person goes to parliament and becomes a millionaire, sometimes even a billionaire in 5 years. So it's a lucrative business. Politics to them is a lucrative business. It is not service. It is not delivery of anything. It is not public service. It is, in fact, I would not even call it a business, because even in the business you have to put something in to get production, right? So there's no investment. It's a looting spree. So that is why the socio-economic political structures have to be overhauled, restructured, made responsive to the needs of the people, and it cannot be done through the existing political parties because they are all compromised. That is why we formed the National Resistance Movement Kenya. Apparently they announced that they had banned the National Resistance Movement, and you know how lazy, this is when you realize these people do not deserve to be where they are. They announced, as they were purportedly removing my citizenship, which they couldn't, and cancelling my passport, which the court has now invalidated the action. They also said that they have banned the National Resistance Movement because it is a criminal organization, and that they have degazetted it. So the question I asked, immediately they said that, I was at home, I laughed. I said, okay, so how do you degazette something you did not gazette? Because presumably it was gazetted, so now you're degazetting. How do you ban something that was not registered? A movement is never registered. It is an idea. It is a cause for which people subscribe. And then we pursue the objectives of the cause. It's not an organization, it's not an NGO, it's not a political party. We believe that these structures will have to be overhauled and restructured. We believe that social justice has to be brought to Kenya. It's been too long. We believe that law and institutions without men and women of integrity to enforce those laws and to run those institutions are nothing but racket outlets. You can call them networks. That's what they are. So you need the people to take charge. And Article 1 of the Constitution of Kenya says sovereignty vests with the people. The people ultimately has the final decision making as to who their leaders should or are going to be. And they can do that peaceably. And this is what we propose to do in NRMKe. You galvanize yourself, you mobilize yourself, you come onto the streets, you make your demands, and you chase the despots away without any bullet being shot, except from the despots themselves. When they do that, the UN and all the international communities will come down on them because they have just butchered innocent civilians. We are not armed. We are not going to get involved in the armed struggle. We are doing this peacefully. It works. It worked in the Philippines. It worked in Burkina Faso. It worked in Ukraine. It worked in Egypt. It worked in Tunisia. It will work in Kenya. That is what we believe in. And that is what we intend to do. There is no turning back. There is no surrender. There is no concession. There is no negotiation over rights, over justice, over truth. There isn't. There's going to be none. The first step is for Uhuru Kenyatta and William Ruto to recognize that they have committed crimes against the Kenyan people and should leave power. Then we restructure the Electoral Commission and have a free, fair, verifiable, credible election. Let Kenyans elect whoever they want. But it must be done in an environment of peace, not just the absence of weapons. Peace is not just the absence of weapons. Having intimidation by the police, of the judiciary, of critics, arresting people without charge, detaining them incommunicado, breaking through their doors, withdrawing their rights at whim. That is not peace. And that is what we have today. Forced peace under the barrel of the gun. Finally, let me say this, because I would like to say this. I'm told I have 10 minutes. I think I have more than enough to say this. So I've been to the United States, more than 6 cities, speaking to audiences just like yours. I didn't have any problems going in and out of the US. I went through Amsterdam, there was no problem. I went through customs, no problem. Nobody asked me any questions. I went to Berlin, and I just came back from Berlin yesterday. I met members of parliament, I met the deputy speaker, I spoke with Kenyans, no issue. I fly into London. This is when you know this is the beast of colonialism. And I'm saying it right here in Oxford, because I should. I arrived there and they stopped me. Border Force. You are liable to be examined, further examined by a Border Force immigration officer under paragraph 2/2A of Schedule 2 of the Immigration Act 1971. 2, you are liable to be detained under paragraph 16(1) to Schedule 2 of the Immigration Act 1971, pending your examination and pending a decision to give or refuse you leave to enter. 3, and I have also retained your passport, identity card, and travel document. This was given to me when I presented myself to be given entry into the country, and I was going to Oxford to give a speech. Now this is egregious nonsense. Then the special branch came to me after I was detained. I was detained there for 3 hours. But the beauty of it is that as a lawyer, I know what to do. I knew they were running around like squirrels over nothing. So I told them, what is it? They couldn't tell me. I knew what it was. I said, I've not been stopped anywhere, and I travel quite a bit. Oh, well, we hope that this is not going to take too long. So they take off with my passport. Then the special branch, after 2 hours, come to me with this. No, they first of all question me, where are you going, where are you coming from, where are you going to stay in Oxford, where are you staying in London, who are you seeing, blah, blah, blah. I know the drill, I answer all their questions. Politely, to the point. I don't say anything more than what they have asked. So then after they have gone, they come back. And he says, no, I don't think you're a terrorist. I don't believe so. But I'm just giving you this because the law requires us to give you. Schedule 7, Terrorism Act 2000. you can throw it away or you can keep it. Now, when I realized this was going on, I called the immigration officer who had taken my passports. And because I'm always prepared, I had copies of my court orders. So I told them, can you read that and give to your supervisor? Maybe it will clarify what it is that you are looking for. So they went read, ran around, and then she said, okay, unfortunately, it's not yet clear whether you will be allowed in, but I'm waiting for a call from the higher ups, whether you should be let in. Now, it was not about immigration. It was not about customs. It was about the higher ups. Having been called by the higher ups in Kenya, and the higher ups say, Miguna should not go to London, should not go to Oxford. Why is it that the US authorities did not listen to the higher ups? Why is it that the German authorities did not listen to the higher ups? Why is it happening in Britain? You know why? Britain still considers Kenya a colony. So what is happening today in Kenya, what I've just described, is being done also, not just in complicity with the colony, but in furtherance of the colonial agenda. That is why we have the leaders we have. They make sure they choreograph the institutions and the laws and the environment so that we have the worst leaders possible, to allow them to extract our resources, to allow us to be poor, to allow us to be misgoverned and oppressed, so that we could never challenge the center. That is what is happening. No wonder Cambridge Analytica was the one involved in the choreography. Thank you.
I will now invite Dr. Burbage to give us a response to everything that Dr. Miguna Miguna has said. And then after Dr. Burbage's response, we'll move on to a question and answer session.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for coming as well. It's really good to have such a packed audience. Thank you especially to Dr. Miguna, who takes a risk in traveling, and we appreciate learning everything we can about Kenya. We also appreciate talking, because I'm a married man, so I know it's good to talk, always. Always good to talk. And when we consider this, I just want to make a few observations. So I'm not going to respond to everything that was said, but I'll try my best to just cover a few points before we go to question and answer. In a lot of the scholarship on Kenya, there is this idea that, well, things just stay the same. So the more they change, the more things just stay the same. So sometimes that can make people feel a bit pessimistic. So we have in Dr. Miguna's remarks details of how things seem to have not been able to move on so well. So, for example, the Electoral Commission has its problems in a similar way to maybe it's been having problems in the past. That you have a fraught declaration of the election in 2007. It seems so similar to the IEBC's inability presently to deal with elections nationwide. You have an incumbent advantage. This is where the person who is already in charge seems to come to the election with some kind of advantage. That controlling security forces means that they can in some way organize, break up, protests, rallies, as would be better for their political campaign. And you also have, similar to before, allegations of rigging, bringing to the courts, but an ultimate feeling of dissatisfaction that the courts have not been able to provide. Of course, in 2007, it was not brought to the courts. In 2013, it was brought to the courts unsuccessfully. And then in 2017, it was brought to the courts successfully, and then leading to all of the frustrated processes that Dr. Miguna has explained, of having people trying to bring again issues that are unresolved within the IEBC and finding themselves in the court process again being frustrated. So it looks as though every single way you go, there is no option for democratic change. But there are two differences I'd like to suggest, that things are not always the same. The first is the rise, I feel, of inheritance thinking among some leaders. So this is the feeling that power is something that you inherit. And that didn't used to be the case in Kenya's history. So if you look at even Daniel Arap Moi and Mwai Kibaki, as much as there is enormous criticism of them and their time in office, they didn't approach office as an inheritance. They approached it as something that requires some sort of earning, either through forming alliances at the elite level, or by being able to show you are somehow more ready to rule than the others. But instead, when evaluating Uhuru Kenyatta, even Gideon Moi, and even Raila Odinga, there can be a second generation dynamic. This is not that they are the ones that were the first to earn it, but in a sense their forefathers have been the ones who have been able to establish themselves and their political class, to which there may be some inheritance thinking. Now the problem with this is that with this 65% of youth that Dr. Miguna mentioned, there is a question mark over what is inheritance. On the one hand, people talk about political inheritance, that is to be able to represent your side within office. On the other hand, there is inheritance of economic means of production, inheritance of employment, inheritance of roles within the family, being able to marry, being able to negotiate a dowry. All of these questions are issues between the generations, and so it crosses not just what is political, but even the socio-economic. And on that front, as much as people outside of the incumbent regime can feel politically excluded, there is this youth who feel excluded, even if you're part of a community which has the reins of power. But the second big difference, I feel, is with this rise of devolution, which wasn't mentioned, but is something we can, of course, explore. Dr. Miguna himself has stood as a candidate for the governorship of Nairobi, so he has direct experience of this. And we can ask whether the devolution process, in a sense, gives a different avenue for the opposition, as opposed to the winner-takes-all presidency. Of course, in the drafting of the 2010 Constitution, there was a conscious decision to try to make it not a winner-takes-all presidency. And in fact, power is distributed in many different ways. Firstly, you have the independent commissions who are supposed to stand outside of politics, and those shouldn't be tampered with politically by the presidency. But even aside from that, you have the devolved administration, whereby you have elected governors, 47 elected governors across the country who receive their popular mandate directly and have a guarantee of at least 15% of national revenue towards their development projects. All of this means that the game has changed slightly, and we can ask, how would an opposition look that is focused on devolution? Of course, for those who want the justice of receiving their votes and winning an election, they can feel that devolution is not enough. But not enough for what? Legally, the presidency has changed, so there will never be the sort of payback of having a kind of one-party state dictatorship that someone can move towards the opposition. So instead, one has to ask, what does an opposition, what is it able to look like in this environment? And as much as we can complain about the harassment towards the Supreme Court when it tried to listen to the additional petitions that were made subsequent to the August 8th election, we can also look at those court cases that happened locally for the governorship elections, that we in fact had 36 registered petitions against these governors. There are just 47 governors, so you're lucky if you don't face a petition. And of those, 3 have so far been successful in ousting governors. So there's Ahmed Mohamed Abdi Mohamud of Wajir, Cyprian Awiti of Homa Bay, and Martin Wambora of Embu. These are governors who have they've been removed successfully according to the courts, which allows for a rerun, a re-election. There have also been 2 governors who have been elected as independent candidates, Mohamed Kuti of Isiolo and Indiriti Murithi of Laikipia. Now, in this sense, you see that for the devolution structure, even with a failing of national parties to achieve as much representation as some of their supporters would have liked, you find independent candidates getting in, and you find successful petitions against governors in the wake of perceived irregularities in the election. Those factors mean that there are appropriate judicial and legal options for forming opposition that can work under the new constitution and avoid the advantage of the incumbency that goes towards the existing president. In the work of the behavioral economist, behavioral psychologist Daniel Kahneman, he says that human beings feel losses far more than we feel gains. That is what he believes a survival strategy, that according to evolution, it's much more important that you remember what you have lost than what you have gained, because that will lead to safety. When you go to the same issue again, you will be risk averse, you will make sure you protect yourself. But we can also see that that sometimes has a bit of a bias towards our perceptions of politics, that we can be much more fixated on stopping the loss that we suffered than trying to achieve gain. new areas of gain can be out there, and it's something that means we need to look creatively, not just in terms of fairness or unfairness, but in what are the good options possible for the way forward. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Dr. So now I will open up the floor to questions. But maybe before I open it up as the chair, I'll take the opportunity to ask my own question first of all. Dr. Miguna Miguna.
You're abusing power right away.
No, I'm exercising discretion. Dr. Miguna Miguna, what would you say are the ideological underpinnings of the National Resistance Movement? Maybe you can take some time to think about it as I ask others, or you can respond now.
No, maybe I'll take all the questions and respond to them at once.
Okay, excellent. So let's open it up to questions at a time, okay? I saw that hand first. The gentleman back here.
Thank you, the General. We are very proud of you, first of all. But my question is that I was hoping that we would talk about the C in C. When you took your time and risked your life and sworn in Raila on 31st of January. 30th of January, sorry. And then today, then we assume, or it is right that he is the leader of NRM Kenya.
Who is the leader?
Raila as a commander-in-chief. Because you are a general, that's what I assume. I was hoping that you would talk about this now called the handshake of Raila and Uhuru, and where does it leave the NRM? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, in fact, my question is related to what the gentleman had just said. My name is Dixon Osage. I'm from the School of the University of Manchester. Dr. Miguna, we all knew that after the coronation, as you call it, October 26th, that Raila Odinga's political career had died, and many had written him off as a man who was dead politically. Then there came the January 30th, where you resurrected his political career from the dead by swearing him in as the people's president. You paid the price with all the atrocities that the Jubilee regime meted on you. Now, fast forward, as you were preparing the Lunga Lunga dance to take Odinga to Canaan, there came the mysterious handshake, which many who are dancing over the handshake terming it to be a divine marriage, which would be the savior of all Kenya's miseries that have bedeviled that nation for many, many years. So where do you see yourself in this scheme of things as you prepare to go back to Nairobi? Are you in touch with Raila? Is he in support of your plans?
Questions so far.
Yeah.
Since we were keeping them to 3, could I allow him to respond to these, and then we'll do another round of 3, okay? Thank you. Well, I asked a third.
Yes, I will answer your questions. NRM is not NASA. So just to address the two of you who assumed that Raila Odinga is the head of NRM, I am the head of NRM, not Raila Odinga. Raila Odinga has never claimed to be the head of NRM, ever. And nobody has ever said there is anybody else other than myself who heads NRM. So I want to be factual. Nobody has claimed leadership to NRM except me. Nobody has challenged my leadership. And nobody has said Raila is the leader of the NRM. Raila is the leader of the National Super Alliance, a political coalition made up of the Orange Democratic Movement, ODM, Amani National Congress, ANC, Ford Kenya, and Wiper. Those are the four political parties that Raila heads. Raila heads a political organization, a coalition, both a political party and a coalition, whose main objective is to get power through the ballot. NRM does not seek power through the ballot. We are not a political party. We don't field candidates, do not intend to field candidates, at least for now. We don't. Now, on October 26th, Uhuru Kenyatta made power through elections effectively non-existent. What they did, they institutionalized the culture of impunity and electoral injustice. They said elections don't matter. We will cook up figures and we will make a leader that we want. Anytime you see any leader that claims that they have won an election, a democratic election, presumably by 98%, you're staring at a real dictator. Anybody who has studied democracy and constitutionalism will tell you that no democratic election, no competitive democratic elections results in anyone getting more than 75%. It is impossible in a multicultural society. Because otherwise, you are sheep. You are people who don't have independent thought. You are people who, it's North Korea, all right? It's anything but a democracy. NRM's intentions is to make sure that an environment is created where a democratic contest can take place. Once we create that, those who head political parties can contest for power. We're not interested. You see now the distinction. If Raila joins NRM, it means he cannot contest for power anymore. Because he will not be running for elections. He will be leading a movement, not a political party. All right? So there is a distinction with a difference. This is the same distinction that existed between Umkhonto Wezizwe, the spear of the nation, and the ANC. Umkhonto never assumed that they were going to produce a president. When they defeated the South African Defense Forces in Quito Cuanavale, all right, when the Cubans and the Umkhonto soldiers defeated the South Africans for the first time in Mozambique, Quito Cuanavale, Mandela, negotiations started to remove Mandela from jail. Mandela, who was in jail for 27 years and was not participating in the battle, came and became president. He was not in Quito Cuanavale. The leader of Umkhonto was Chris Hani, not Nelson Mandela. He was the commander-in-chief. A commander-in-chief doesn't have to be the president of a country, as you can just see. Sinn Féin and the IRA, the same. Distinction with a difference. The same distinction in this movement. Raila, when after the handshake, the so-called handshake, look at what he did. He said he disbanded the People's Assembly, which was not an arm or an organ of the NRMKe. He disbanded distinction, and that is the way it is going to stay. Now, ideological underpinnings. We are scientific in orientation. You listen to me, you only hear facts. No suppositions, no conjecture, no mumbling, no rambling, no meandering. We deal with concrete things, materially concrete things. We base our facts on evidence. We analyze facts using logic and reason only. and we deduce conclusions from that. So if you want to call that socialist, materialist, or whatever it is, in terms of our orientation, we seek to address the social injustices in Kenya. Here in Britain, which is a capitalist state, by the way, they have a social welfare system, where if you don't have a job, you don't have a house, you can go to the government and you can seek some relief. Why wouldn't we have that in Kenya? Why? And yet we are poorer in terms of services, in terms of housing, in terms of employment. We have a lot of resources, hoarded by less than 1% of the population. We need to address that. We need to create jobs. We need to bridge the gap between the rich and the poor. We need to build housing. We need to create universal health care for everyone. We need to address the needs of our people. That's different, isn't it? Now, so I've answered that. Rao is not the leader. I'm not going to talk about the handshake. It has no meaning to me. It's done by Raila Odinga and Uhuru Kenyatta. They don't lead the NRM. So Uhuru Kenyatta can speak on behalf of Jubilee. Raila Odinga can speak on behalf of NASA. I'm not a member of NASA. I don't intend to be. Do you see that? When, you see, a lot of people thought I joined NASA. I never did. Tell me when. I don't belong to a party. I'm not a member of ODM. What happened was this, and I've always been on this path. I stand for truth. I stand for integrity. I stand for a merit-based society where your qualifications, your abilities propel you to whatever it is that you get. All right? No name dropping, no familial link, no nepotism, no tribalism, purely merit. If you're good in maths, you do things oriented to maths. You understand? So, now that Miguna is a merit-based man, he would want a society in Kenya that reflects those values. All right? And I have identified the process, the means to get that. I've called it the Lunga Lunga dance. It's just a metaphor for what is going to start on March 26th. It's a popular, direct people's movement. Very legitimate. Somebody said that this was a path to take Odinga to Canaan. I've not spoken of Canaan. But even if I was to speak of Canaan, Canaan would symbolize probably the society that I've just described. It was not for Odinga only. This was meant to be for Kenyans. We are not doing this for Odinga. It just happened that I was very angry, very disappointed, and decided to take a stand when he was robbed of his victory. Personal differences or agreements apart, I'm the kind of man, I'm the kind of person who believes that when one has won an election, it is not up to me to decide. It is up to Kenyans, and they made that decision. Give him power. That's it. Whether you like it or not. Because you want to create a society based on the rule of law that respects justice. And by no means am I saying that if I disagree with someone, they should die, or they should be persecuted, or they should be denied what they deserve. So on that basis we agreed, me and Raila Odinga. And he has spent most of his life fighting for the same things that I'm talking about. He went to detention for 8.5 years, fighting for the same things. I want to remind him that we have not forgotten what he went to jail for. I would like to remind him that 400 of his supporters were butchered like insects by Uhuru Kenyatta, the person he now calls his friend. I would like to remind Raila Odinga that Uhuru Kenyatta is a criminal who has not reformed. is an irredeemable criminal whose reformation or reform can only happen, number one, he confesses his sins or his crimes. Number two, he seeks forgiveness. Number three, he is punished to the full extent of the law. Then we will forgive him. Then we will count him as having reform. That's why penitentiaries were built. There is no option. That's my answer.
Okay, we'll take 3 more questions. There was a lady somewhere there. Oh, good. One here, please.
I'm Kinyolende. It's interesting you mentioned your ideology. It's something we've heard about. And as the professor mentioned, devolution is one of the key issues that will address inequality, which I think is our biggest issue. But when it comes to your ideology and NRM ideology, it seems that it is very close to ODM ideology. And since 2005, the party that has fought most for the socio-economic rights is ODM. And in fact, when you were in illegal detention, the people who helped you the most was our Secretary General, Edwin Miguna, and other people from the ODM. So regardless of the handshake and the other misgivings people might have about the party, what will you do when you go back to Kenya, even though they're two different organizations, NRM and ODM, given that you're so closely aligned? Will you keep the communication channels open and work together?
I would urge us to please try and keep our questions short so that we can allow him more time to respond, okay? The lady, please.
Hi, my question is, how do you see the NRM movement building momentum in Kenya?
Yes.
Okay. I could take one more question. Yes.
My question is, what would bring you to the table? Because the environment in Kenya has changed. I know NRM is independent, but I think the environment has changed with that handshake. What would bring you to the table if Raila and Uhuru ask you to? What would you consider?
Say this. Devolution is not a panacea for Kenya's problem. In fact, devolution is a watered-down version of federalism. We did not seek devolution in the Constitution. It was watered down because members of parliament went and negotiated down what we had agreed on. 15% of the audited budget of a country cannot eradicate poverty, cannot bring equity and equality. Anybody who thinks that is delusional, and I'm not saying you are. I'm simply saying it's not true. It cannot work. 2, you need a robust federal state or a robust devolutionary arrangement with probably 50 to 65% of the budget going to these devolved states. Then you need to eradicate corruption. Because corruption has been devolved to the devolved units. And almost all public money gets sucked into that corruption channel. So people don't get the services that they deserve. That's a fact. So us singing around devolution, it's just not true. You see, you can have courts, you can have police. It doesn't mean that they treat people well or that they met out justice. But you can sing about justice all day long. It doesn't mean anything. If on the ground, it means nothing. And this is what is happening to devolution. So you must know the software. Hardwares will not work without a software. The software to leadership is integrity. It's not law. It's not the constitution. It's not the institutions of governance. It is the integrity of the leaders themselves. That is where the problem is. There are countries that existed, even this one, without a written constitution. The Magna Carta was not written. But you had a modicum of democratic practice. It's a monarchy, yet still democratic, right? So that's what I'm talking about. The Queen could exercise all the powers that she has under the Magna Carta, and you guys can be stifled. But she doesn't do that. She doesn't need the law to do that. So that's a very significant point that we must get. This singing about devolution is misplaced. Devolution was supposed to devolve power and resources to the people. Do you think that power and resources have been devolved? Uhuru Kenyatta still has all the power. First of all, start with the police. It's not devolved. It is national, and he abuses it. All the security sectors. Even though the devolved powers or units collect taxes, it goes to Treasury. Treasury then decides where to take it to. The national debt, which has grown beyond human comprehension, now shackles everyone, even though it is the national government that went and they never went to the devolved units to seek consensus or agreement as to whether or not they should go and borrow. But now everybody is paying the tax. I'm just mentioning a few examples to demonstrate to you that don't sing about devolution. That is a diversionary subject. And anybody who thinks that that will solve our problems is a dreamer. We had devolution in 1963 in the first constitution and in the first governance arrangement. What happened? Jomo Kenyatta starved the units to death. You can do it. You just refuse to release the money. They die a natural death. That is happening right now as we speak. So with all due respect, doctor, we call him Kenya Daktari, Dr. Marie, it will not work that way. So we cannot say that. And by the way, Moi also inherited power. Moi inherited one-party state and continued with it for nearly 24 years. He was given power on a silver platter because of the chronic the arrangements that Kenyatta had created, the unequal arrangements supported by the British, because that's what they want. Now, the second question, NRM, is it building momentum in Kenya? NRM is the thing. Everybody's saying, I can even see that gentleman wearing the t-shirt right here in Ghana. Yeah? Look, there is no state in the world that would ban an unregistered organization that is in existence for less than 6 months if that organization is not powerful. Why would you bother with it? There is no government in the world that would declare the leader of that organization a non-citizen and deport that leader and say they threaten national security, yet they are civilians. I'm just a lawyer. So how do I threaten national security? If I do, and I've committed a crime, arrest me, charge me, take me to court, try me, convict me, jail me. They know they can't do that. So what do? They say, the problem solved, take him to another country. That is fear. So if they can fear a civilian, a man, just one man, and do that, what does that tell you about the organization? It answers itself. What will happen, what will bring, no, I skipped one. Working with ODM. A good question. Ideologically, you're wrong. ODM is not subscribing to our orientation. In fact, ODM right now does not have an ideology. Tell me the ideology. And don't tell me about paper. Tell me substance in terms of policy. How are ODM governors governing different from Jubilee? They're the same. They're stealing like Jubilee. They're mismanaging public resources like Jubilee. They are misusing and suppressing the people like Jubilee. There is no difference substantively in terms of policy, in terms of practice. We have to be honest with ourselves. But no, you asked a question, I'm answering. So, yeah, it is fair, I'm answering. So we can't pretend We can't play games around these things. Just because you like the ODM leader does not mean you fail to recognize where they have failed. Their governors have failed just like Jubilee governors. This is a fact. And if we don't state this fact, we are lying to the Kenyan people. Then we are not different from them. We want to be able to be different. We want to be able to be retrospective and honest with ourselves. That is the beginning of solving a problem. Number two, ODM has now gone to bed with Jubilee. So how do we work with ODM? We can't work with anyone who is trying to paper over egregious human rights violations. I talked to Baby Pendo and Baby Mora and Master Mutinda. Where is justice for their parents and for them? Where is justice for the relatives and the wife and children of Chris Musando? Where is the justice for the 400 that Uhuru Kenyatta has killed since August 8th? Where is the justice? You want me now to just roll over because of a handshake? I can't do it. I have loyalty to the people who have died. All right? I don't have loyalty to a leader. I have loyalty to principles, to virtues, to values. And these are integrity, truth, honesty, and merit-based society. Social justice. That's what I value. Now, so what would happen to bring me to the table? If these things happen, I would be happily at the table. But these things I've described. But you see, this table, the person who sits at the head of the table is the killer. Ask yourself the question. If Raila Odinga knew that Uhuru Kenyatta was his brother, and that he was going to surrender, and that he was going to recognize Uhuru Kenyatta, why did these people have to die? Why did you refuse to concede on August 8th? Why did you withdraw from the second rerun, the fresh elections? Why did you call for demonstrations? Why did you come from the United States and allow us to go and meet you so that they could kill 18 men between the Jomo Kenyatta International Airport to the CBD? My friend, I care about that. When I go to sleep, those are the people that keep me awake. Not Raila Odinga, not Uhuru Kenyatta. Those are the people why I'm here. Those are the people why I'm going back. I'm sacrificing my life, as you will. Have you done that? So be in ODM, leave NRM alone.
So maybe we'll take final question. Okay, I'll start with the gentleman here. Actually, sorry, I'll start with that gentleman there because he raised his hand.
Thank you. Just a point of correction from the point you mentioned in passing about the Magna Carta. I think that the reason of having created Magna Carta in the first place was to try and clip the wings of the monarchy, which was getting very strong, and return the power to the people. But the Queen might not exercise all those powers, as you may have mentioned. That aside, I move now to the main question. Good that you have given us clarification of what the political parties are and the NRM. Now, a common voter in Kenya knows that either you're in government, therefore you benefit, or you're in opposition and you really struggle. NRM is kind of lingering in between the two. What would you do to actually make that voter understand that NRM is something? Is this just an elitist idea, maybe?
Hello, my name's Diki. I've been in Britain for a long time, so my question is in regards to information and how information is shared to the public. Clearly, you are well exposed to the information around what the elites or cartels, as you may say, are doing. How can we ensure that we use facts and evidence, which is part of your ethos and ideology, to move the Kenyan wananchi from their point of maybe tribal conflict to actually being knowledgeable so they can make clear, defined decisions when it comes to any political decisions they have to make?
The lady at the back.
Since the elections in 2016, 2017, sorry, last year, from my point of view, I've seen there's a big division in the country, coming from the atrocities that have happened in the country since independence. We've never had peace and reconciliation in Kenya. So many people have been killed since the independence. Is there any way that Kenya can move towards secession peacefully so that everybody can have their own chunk and do with it what they want to do with it?
So my question is probably uncomfortable. One is your own legitimacy. How do you feel? What gives you the legitimacy to be the torchbearer for this new Kenya? What do you think a common person would think of you doing this? And the second question is, how is the women's situation in NRM? How is the relationship between, because one of the challenges we have is women politicians in Kenya have to be able to take on those positions. So how has that changed in NRM compared to how the other parties do it? So basically, what gives you the legitimacy to be the torchbearer for this movement? And two, what is the relationship with NRM with female politicians?
Because I'm closing, could I take two more? There's a gentleman there.
My question will be, I think a little bit difficult for you, but having worked with Raila for quite some time, do you think Raila himself as a person, do you think Raila has any integrity?
Why did you think it was difficult?
My question is, thanks Dr. Miguna for your illuminating thoughts. My question is regarding just what's happened in Kenya in the last year and the court battles and the tests of our constitution. And I wonder whether from all that hullabaloo that's happened, is there any positivity, if any?
Very last question from the lady.
Yes, a lot of Kenyans, they are not happy with what's happening because we are voting and it doesn't count. And now that there is this handshake and they have resigned, they don't know what to do. So they are waiting upon Dr. Miguna Miguna to lead us to a situation where our votes will count. And they are asking Dr. Miguna Miguna if you could do something. If you could take this Cambridge being a recognized institution, they are meddling into our affairs. I mean, themselves, they've got democracy. They do elect their leaders, but they don't want us Kenyans to elect our leaders. They are meddling there.
What is the question?
I'm saying if there is a law that Daktari can use to sue the Cambridge and to sue the Code and to sue there is one Commonwealth now in Kenya going to see the government how they will share the power. I mean, let this British, let these Americans leave us alone to elect our leaders. I mean, is there a law that we can use, or is there an international court where we can take, like the president, seeing that they don't obey any law? Even now, the Interior Minister said Dr. Miguna will come in Kenya as a Canadian citizen. He doesn't obey any law. Is there any court where we can take them?
I'm inclined to close, but I can see two very interesting questions. Is yours not a question?
Mine was more of a statement than...
Well, I want to keep it.
Okay, I'll make it a question. It's very important.
Very important.
Yes. I would say thank you, first of all, Dr. Miguna, because yes, we do appreciate and we understand the sacrifices you're making. We must be addressing these questions, which are extremely important for our country. And the question is, or rather, I believe we should also be addressing the standards that are being accepted for African nations as compared to the standards that are being accepted here in the Western world as well. Without addressing these questions, I believe it's going to be a big challenge for us to.
You still kept it in the comment. And the last one, the very last one.
Thank you. Generally, you ran in what one would say is a constituency that is a microcosm of Kenya. What lesson did you take from that election regarding the Kenyan voter? What's the psyche of the Kenyan voter?
Okay, that's that.
Thank you very much. I'll answer the question seriatim, the way that they are asked. Number one, I recognize the distinction you try to draw with respect to Magna Carta, but only to add that it didn't claim the Queen's powers. You still have the monarchy, it did not dissolve it. It is the cultural struggles of the British people that have clipped the Queen's powers. It's not been done legally. Now, to your question, that in the mind of most Kenyans, you posit, you are either in government and you reap the benefits, or you are in the opposition. Well, first of all, there is no scientific study that agrees with you that is what is in the mind of most Kenyan voters. Number two, there isn't. There is no scientific study. It's just something the media repeats over and over again, and people accept as fact. But in fact, there is no research that has been done, scientific research, that has made that conclusion. And if you look at the history of Kenya, and you see how Kenyans have risen up against oppressive regimes successively, and actually managed sometimes to wrestle them down, like with the repeal of Section 2A of the old Constitution, and forcing Daniel Arap Moi to agree to the reintroduction of multi-party democracy, you will see that the mentality of the majority of Kenyans is to resist those tendencies and not to believe that you are empowered to reap benefits and the opposition simply opposes. And I'll give you another example. In 2005, there was a referendum that pitted Kibaki, the president at the time, versus Raila Odinga-led ODM. ODM defeated the government. So the people don't necessarily believe that the government is there for reaping and whatnot. The people believe in justice. And the people, the majority of the people right now in Kenya, are more or less supporting the NRM agenda, believe it or not. I'll give you an example that will illustrate it. And only someone who is dishonest will disregard this. 2 weeks after Uhuru Kenyatta was so-called inaugurated at Kasarani Stadium, where people were invited by cards and transported there, he had a Jamhuri celebrations in Nairobi. Less than 2,000 people attended. That was a demonstration of non-confidence. I, Miguna, through the NRM, we organized the swearing in of the people's president on the 30th of January. More than 1 million people showed up. They were not paid. They were not transported there. They walked there, they transported themselves there. Maybe with the exception of the 5 buses that came from Mombasa. That is a demonstration of confidence. That is what you have on the ground, whether you want to believe it or not. It is a fact. Uhuru leads a regime that has the military, has the police, has the intelligence, has the bureaucracy. And he can't even try one man called Miguna in a court of law. Is that a demonstration of strength or weakness? A demonstration of weakness on the side of the government? Now, information sharing. And then a comment that there is something about tribal conflict. There's no tribal conflict in Kenya. There is none. At Uhuru Park that day, there were more than 1 million people there from all ethnic communities. There is no tribal problem in Kenya. The tribal agenda is only being driven by the tiny minority elite whose interest is to divide and rule. That is their interest. The narrative that there are tribal tensions in Kenya is a narrative of those intent on suppressing the majority of the Kenyan people. The majority of Kikuyus are poor, just like the majority of Luo. Really, there are only two classes of people in Kenya, the poor and the rich. When you go to Mathare today, you are finding Luos and Kikuyus and lawyers and Krisis living together in harmony, and they suffer under the same conditions. You go to all the other slums, the same thing. So the only people that are coming up with this tribal narrative, Cambridge Analytica being paid billions by Jubilee to manipulate the mind of Kenyans so that they can retain power and accountability. Now, the information is getting there. Even gardeners, even house girls have access to Facebook right now. Of course, Cambridge Analytica mainly use Facebook, but I'm just trying to tell you how pervasive the social media is. Almost everyone in the village now has WhatsApp, all right? And a lot of people use Twitter. Almost everybody I know, even in the rural places, has a radio. FM stations, they listen, they watch TV. The information is getting there. Of course, it could always be best if it got out more, but I can't complain. And we are reaching the people. We are reaching the people. That is why Uhuru Kenyatta switched off the TV channels, the signals. If people were not watching TV, if only a small fraction of Kenyans watch TV, he would not bother, because it would not affect him. Big division in the country, and then a reference to peace and reconciliation and secession. Let me start with secession. Secession is not on the agenda of the NRM. Not on the agenda. Never has been on the agenda. We are fighting for the indivisibility of Kenya. Kenya as a unit. One indivisible country, made democratic, governed by the rule of law. Not secession. You know why? The majority of Kenyans are supporting our agenda. They want social justice. Only a tiny minority are ruling them badly. So we just need to remove them. There are so few. We are so many. Why do we need to divide the country because of so few? They can't even form a constituency if we decided to put them in one constituency. The billionaires and millionaires in Kenya are small, tiny fraction of thieves. Very small. So, removing them is easier than dividing the country. Because when you get into a secessionist war, it will last at least 30 years to 50 years. All of us will be dead. Why do you want to get into that exercise when you don't know after you are dead whether it will continue? I want the results now. And we can do it. So I'm not going to get involved in some bloody war that is going to take 50 years when I can get rid of these guys in 3 months. Peace and reconciliation can only come from truth and justice. Without truth and justice, there is no reconciliation. I would not want anybody to reconcile with anyone who has committed egregious crimes against them on the basis of a handshake without truth and justice. Who killed Baby Pendo? Why did they do it? Why haven't they been arrested? Why haven't they been charged and convicted and sentenced? That is the question. And we have thousands of Baby Pendos. That is the question I'm asking. And until it is addressed and the perpetrator answers to the charges, there is no reconciliation. After all, they have not even implemented the Truth and Reconciliation Commission report. Remember? And my colleague here was talking about commissions, independent commissions. Uhuru has raided them and is now appointing heads of commissions. You know that EACC is dead, that is supposed to superintend over corruption. Dead. Uhuru governs it. Uhuru raided the ODPP, the Office of Public Prosecution. He appointed the head, a minister, and has appointed the director of National Intelligence Service to head it. Uhuru appointed the head of police, regular police. He appointed the head of CID. He appointed the head of everybody. He's just appointing people without following the process. Yet these commissions were set up as independent. The Police Service Commission was supposed to advertise, interview, vet, then shortlist. You know what happened? They advertised for one day. The following day they appointed. So who applied? This is nonsense. What gives me legitimacy? The Constitution gives me legitimacy. The Constitution says I have the right to think for myself. I have the right to a conscience. I have the right to assemble. I have the right to demonstrate. I have the right to organize. The Constitution says. And that's exactly what I'm doing. I've not prevented anyone from forming a movement. I've not stopped anyone. I've not stopped women. I've not stopped children. I've not stopped old men. I've not stopped Kenyans abroad. I've not stopped Kenyans in Kisumu or Mombasa or Kiambu. If they want to form their movement, they are free to do so. I have formed mine. You can't stop me from doing it. We have women, and you saw them even at my home, challenging the police. Where did they come from? Did I make them? I was not even there. You saw women leaders of NRM running all over Kiambu County looking for me. You saw them in Kajiado. Why would they be facing risk of being killed by the police if I'm such a bad man? And they have not complained. By the way, not one. And you know they can be bought in Kenya. And they could have called a press conference by now. None has spoken. No rank has been broken. That is what happens when you build an organic organization based on integrity. Nobody will be bought like these parties. You've not seen it. You will not see it. But they are free to form theirs. Having worked with Raila Odinga, is he a person of integrity? That is a diversionary question that I am not going to answer. Because what you want to do